something that I want to talk about initially was this idea of a local artist. And a few weeks ago at Portland State, we had a conference called Open Engagement, and one of the artists who came to speak at that, Fritz Haig, at one of the panels, talked about this interesting phenomenon, which is that currently, and I think Portland sort of exemplifies this, there's a really high value placed on local things, local products, CSA farms, local meat, locally made clothes, locally scavenged wood, all sorts of things like that. And I think that's something that's becoming popularized across the country, and in particular is something highly valued here. But the thing that he was saying that is interesting is that while most things are becoming valued that are local, that local artists are still not a valued commodity. That for some reason that's the one element that sort of really stands out, that local artists seem to have sort of a bad rap, and that almost like regardless of where you are, wherever you're local to, you're like automatically less interesting if you're a local artist as opposed to being an international artist or someone from New York or Chicago. I mean, maybe it's different in New York or LA, but it seems like almost everywhere else, if you're a local artist, it's almost like something that's a bad thing, or it's a problem. The thing that's interesting to me about David is that he's sort of the epitome of a local artist. He's not just someone who happens to be here in Portland but's making work that looks like work being made anywhere else, or is sort of being designed to be shown in New York or LA within the sort of art market. And instead he's focusing very, very particularly on his local environment, not just Portland, but his own neighborhood, and in the case of these works, which are similar to some others, his own backyard, literally. So that's a really interesting thing. But it doesn't stop there, because then David also is very, from his own particular set of reasons, which maybe we can find out more about, also prefers not to really show the work. There was a collector who's based in Paris and in San Francisco who offered to buy his work within the last year, and he declined. So I mean, how many artists are there out there that are doing that? I think very few. I mean, that's like, in some ways, it's almost like this romantic idea that doesn't really exist or something, that an artist would do that. And the reasons, from what I've gathered, are that he wants to keep the collection together. He feels like it makes more sense. But that's when some of the rationalizations start to happen too, that it's like more likely that somebody's going to buy it if all of them are together or something like that.
I couldn't support myself doing it anyway. I mean, if I'm doing 1 or 2 paintings a year, and you're selling to a dealer who takes 50%, which is like the standard thing for those of you who aren't familiar with the art world, you can do the math pretty quickly and see how ridiculous it would be for me to think that I might make a living doing it. So in the meantime, I've been working for the city and earlier had other jobs. So, there are artists who can get that kind of money, but you do that by selling a lot of work and building your prices up. With the amount of work I had, there's really no way for me to do that, so I just never had that expectation. So since I was supporting myself by other means, and I didn't really feel like selling the paintings, I was really under no pressure to do that. After all those years of really having my work unknown, I had a chance to test all these questions I'd had about what I wanted to do with the stuff. But after thinking about it for several months, I decided, I just want to hang on to these things. And so my simple answer is that I just like keeping the work myself, and I don't really understand why entirely, but I'm in a position where I put myself in a position where I can just kind of go with that. I don't need to really understand it. I can just do it. I can just keep the work, which is what I want to do.
Well, one, and I think probably maybe a lot of people here know this, but that you're colorblind, and so that was one of the reasons why you chose to work in a monochromatic.
Yeah.
But I think probably some people don't realize that, and so that's an interesting thing, and that you told me a little bit about the process of getting there. Maybe you could talk about that.
I do see color, but there's a lot that I don't see. So it creates real problems for me. I'll tell you one story from high school. I was working on a still life, and I worked on it for months. I was just going over and over and over and trying to find right colors, and nothing really made sense to me. And finally, I got it to where it was done, and a friend of mine watched me touching up this chair that I decided was finally going to be pink. Only I was putting chartreuse on it to tighten it up, and she said, well, why are you doing that? And I kind of looked at the tube and I said, oh, well, that's what chartreuse is, because I just thought chartreuse was pink somehow. So, I mean, sometimes people say, well, geez, it would be really interesting if you painted in color. But it's really only interesting in a medical sense. It's very frustrating when you're trying to express something. And people are seeing something that's wildly different from what you intended. And I actually did paint in color all through college, just trying to fake it basically and use, very artificial colors and keep it very simple. But I'd also done printmaking all through college and lithography and etching in black and white, which I loved. And finally, sometime after I graduated, it finally occurred to me that I could paint in black and white as well. And that's what I've done ever since then. And I really feel like I can express everything I want in black and white. I don't feel like I'm missing out by not painting in color at all. I love black and white.
And then the other thing is the Parkinson's that you've been dealing with for several years now, and how that's impacted the way that you paint, which what you told me the other day is that it hasn't really impacted things that much. But on the other hand, you've had to switch from your right hand to your left hand.
I'm now developing a tremor in my left hand as well, so I'm not sure if I go to my feet next or what, but as long as I can hold a brush with something, I can find a way to do it. But as I was saying to Harrell, people sometimes think that there's something heroic or inspirational about that. I don't see it that way at all, because this is just, really what I do, and it's very, very difficult work anyway, and always was. And what's the expression that it's, doing our work is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. Perspiration is a labor. The perspiration is problem solving, and so it's mostly mental. Doing this with a brush, this kind of work, there's really not much to it. It's something I can train in offhand to do. So it's really, my bigger concern is just what happens to my mental process if I'm not able to concentrate at some point. But what I was getting to with that is that, I'm just solving problems all day long when I paint. That's what I do. And so the tremor that I have is just one more problem. It's not something that makes what I do essentially different. It just makes it a little more difficult than it already was, and it was very difficult to begin with. So it's something that I can deal with.
You base these paintings on photographs that you take within your own neighborhood, oftentimes compositing various images together to get the right image to then paint. And even then you wind up altering things from there. But it seems like, and then we were commenting on this earlier, that sometimes people confuse them when they just take a quick glance, assuming that they are photographs, the paintings themselves. But I'm just sort of curious about your relationship to photography, because it seems like in some ways it's so important, even though it's not.
It's note-taking, basically, what it is. And, I actually have at best an average and probably a poor visual memory. And there are artists out there. My mother's uncle, who was a very fine professional artist, was one of them, who can go out and sketch something and then do a very finished painting from the sketch. I just don't have that kind of facility, and never did. I mean, I draw okay, but not great, and I could never work really from sketches. So photography is a great tool for me. Typically, I'm working from quite a few photographs when I do any particular piece. And sometimes they're pretty close to what's there, sometimes they're not. It varies. I guess over the years I've gotten more and more free with making composites and things like that. But this is actually one reason why I do stick. Over the years I venture less far and less far from home when I do these for about 10 years now, I think I haven't gone more than a block away from my house for a subject. And that's not just because it's particularly interesting to me, but it's because it's just convenient that way. If I need to go back and look or to take more pictures, it's just very convenient to have it right outside my front door.
They oftentimes imply a narrative of some sort. And then that was making me think also of a Northwest writer, Raymond Carver, and these sort of very simple narratives that he wrote that were also very personal, oftentimes based on his own life and experiences. And if there was any sort of relationship, if you felt any relationship to him or to narrative in general.
Well, I like Carver, and I think if you're going to compare my work to anyone's narrative, I think that would be probably fitting. I mean, there's something very spare and direct about his work that I think I might like to think is analogous to mine somehow. But I don't really think about narrative. In fact, it's kind of tricky because I want to have figures in the paintings most of the time. And I don't want to have them just standing there posing, so they need to do something. But on the other hand, I really don't want to tell a story, so I try to have people usually doing things that are ambiguous, and if they suggest a narrative to people, and that makes for a richer viewing experience for people, I have no objection to that, certainly, but I really never have any particular narrative in mind.